What's the most useless thing they teach in school? The entire life of my school founder. The worst of all is that they teach us the same thing all the years. Why would anyone need that? I presume it's a vanity thing the founder installed at some point. I will pay for the creation of a school, but I have one caveat. They went to L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology school. I actually liked how they did that at our school, just once in class. But in the entrance hall there was a big picture of him with a short biography. Back in the days he was shot in his office for defying the Nazis. We're in Germany. That was pretty cool to learn. And I respected him for that. The fact that I still remember it after 10 years out of school shows how well that method worked. Or maybe it's just me. But yeah, in general class time shouldn't be wasted on teaching about such things ad nauseum. Could have used that for teaching about taxes or something. It makes sense if you have a cool school founder. My elementary school, ages 5-10ish, in Northern California was named after the sheep farmer who owned the land the neighborhood was built on. Not nearly as cool. See that bridge? I built it with my own hands. Do they call me Angus the bridge builder? No, at least they don't teach different things about the same guy. Wait until year 3. That's when you learn about the game. I graduated in 1991 for context and while living in Phoenix, they taught us square dancing in gym class. I must say though, that the most useful skill that I was taught at that school that I use every single day is typing. Square dancing has been taught in schools for many decades, all thanks to the industrialist Henry Ford. He pushed for it hard and won. He didn't like the new dances people were doing and wanted this American tradition preserved. Yeah. But in all fairness, in elementary school it was probably our first chance to have physical contact with a girl. I still vividly remember a square dancing session we had in 4th grade, where a caller came to our school and taught us some dances. It almost sounds like yesterday. He land a toe, and he land a toe, and slide, 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 repeat, clap, right, clap, left, clap, both, clap, knee, and an elbow swing. Can't remember the rest. Funny the things we remember sometimes. We were taught square dancing in elementary school, late 60s early 70s for me. And learned some variations to the calls that I still remember. Swing your partner round and round, hit her in the face and knock her down. When she gets up off the floor, kick her fat ass out the door. Dude. I graduated in 2002 in Connecticut, and I still had to learn square dancing. Shit was boring as fuck. Y'all, I was teaching this shit in 2020. I brought it up to the depth chair, and I was like, why? Oh, the kids here actually really like it and get into it. Turns out, emphasizing how much well fuck your grade up if you don't go along with it translates to the kids really like it. I'm 100% supportive of dance as a unit. But for fuck's sake, why square dancing? There are so many other, more meaningful ways to teach dance. I was so bad at typing when they started teaching it in like 1st or 2nd grade. I just barely got the 15 WPM needed to pass. It's weird because after that class, I can't remember ever having been a slow typer. In the 80s we had a typing class offered in grade 9. I thought, what a useless course. I'm going to be a scientist, not a secretary. So I opted not to take that class. I became an engineer and have been typing 8 hours a day for the last 30 years. They taught competitive cup stacking in my elementary school. Still have no idea why. Edit. This was in central Canada, but clearly it was widespread across a lot of North America. Please stop asking me if I went to your school. I probably didn't. Shoot. Why not? What better way to get hand-eye coordination up? That's the thing so many people miss about grade school. You're not actually expected to use most of the knowledge you gain there. It's about learning how to learn. It's about learning how to commit to understanding a thing, even if it seems boring or useless. That's what prepares you to excel in life. But if you end up actually finding a use for advanced algebra, well, that's a bonus. You won't have a calculator in your pocket in the real world. Yeah, no, as pissed off as it made me in class, I'm a bit grateful to be able to do math without a calculator. Then again, I suck at math, so calculators weren't allowed until I got to grade 9, and I still can't do mental calculations for the life of me. If you ask me on the street a simple question like what's 16 times 3, I just won't be able to answer. Or at least not quickly. To be fair, I don't think anyone has taught that way for quite a while. Even before tablets and smartphones, my calc classes leaned heavily on calculators. Edit. Okay, I yield. There's more holdouts than I thought, and some profs are still sticking to the old, unrealistic ways. I found in calc that, even when I thought I knew what I was doing, I had no fucking clue what I was doing. A calculator isn't going to help that part of mayo. It's only as intelligent as the person pushing the buttons. I don't care if you actually know 6882 by heart, but you should know the number is close to 5600 just by looking at it. So if you accidentally get 12,345,678, or 3.97, because you typed something wrong, you won't just blindly go with the wrong answer. I have to disagree with this one. In everyday life, I commonly come across situations in when great mental math skills have been useful to me. Sure, we always have calculators these days, but not needing one in the first place for basic problems saves you a heck of a lot of time. In the real world, when they give you change somewhere, you gonna hold the line flipping out your phone to calculate if you got the right amount of change, because believe it or not, there are people deadass going around in life not knowing how to subtract 63 from 100 in their head. Also, fun fact, I shit you not, a popular fast food restaurant, think it was McDonald's, but I might be wrong, once came out with a 1/3 pound burger, but discontinued it because many people said they didn't think it made sense to pay more for a 1/3 pound burger when the 1/4 pound option was both bigger and cheaper. That's just the reasoning, not the lesson or philosophy. A better reasoning is that being able to think mathematically is helpful. One example is that you won't always take out the calculation in your pocket in the real world. According to my son, apparently everything, all of me, loves all of you. Me in school, math is awful and bullshit. Me at my job, needing to use linear algebra, yeah, done fucked up. Past me. He's right. The vast majority of skills I use at work are self-taught. I wonder if that has anything to do with being well practiced and learning things. The ability to learn and think is definitely a skill that can be improved. However, most high schools do not put an emphasis on this. A lot of high school is just rote memorization and regurgitation. Most people do not need to use either of those skills. Even doctors and lawyers rely heavily on Google and research to constantly refresh their memories. Doctors and lawyers are really good at research though, but this skill was probably learned in university. In my experience, the way Jim and Pei were taught were pretty useless because they never taught us how to train or improve our athletic abilities. It was just weeks of half-heartedly playing basketball with minimal adult supervision. And then one day we had to run a mile and the coaches would go out of their way to humiliate anyone who couldn't just get up and run a mile under 10 minutes with no training or preparation. It put me off running and exercise in general for a long time. And I hate to say it, many of the PE teachers and coaches were pretty unhealthy themselves. All my gym teachers were fat, middle-aged men. I'm a gym teacher. I'm a fat, middle-aged man. Can confirm. In an attempt to rationalize it, I've definitely had moments where after a long day of being in a gym surrounded by screaming children, the last thing I want to do is go to a gym. Different environments obviously, but at a certain point exercise stopped being an escape for me and instead became something I was trying to escape from. So after long days in the gym, all I wanted to do was go home and relax. My physical activity levels plummeted after starting my career. The reality though is just that I drank too much. Part of that could be from the stress, but it's mostly just because I wanted to. I didn't understand how to throw a baseball or a basketball until I was 15 and a fellow classmate showed me that the way I move my fingers and release with my wrist made incredible differences. The teacher just kept saying use your wrist without explaining what I was doing wrong. I hated sports as a kid. I really wanted to be on teams and learn how to play, but I just get benched because I didn't understand the rules or how to throw on every single level. Public school failed me. The only thing I learned was how to take a test. I didn't really get interested in sports or exercise until I was 19 and went to a Krav Maga class. From there I got really interested in boxing and Muay Thai. I think a big reason why I loved it so much is that the teachers took time to explain things to me. They didn't just say, "Put your body behind your punch." They broke down every movement and had me practice over and over until I got it. Having that level of instruction would have helped me immensely for something like basketball or baseball. Just like you, I would instead get some vague instructions and then the coaches and my classmates all berating me for not doing well or knowing the rules. This 100% I only started getting interested in athletics and working out again in my 30s because of the lingering bad taste of this. It could not possibly be a worse way to teach, to test, to improve. It's fully senseless and serves only to hurt people who aren't naturally good at it. I had the same experience. I was not the most athletic kid, and having the teacher throw us all on the track and say, "Okay, now run a mile as fast as you can," was really disheartening. I only learned as an adult that running isn't terrible and in fact is pretty enjoyable because I learned how to actually train for it and work my way up to the distance I want to run. Well, I'm old, so take my answer in context. How to use an abacus. Interestingly, there is a ton of research showing that learning how to use an abacus improves children's ability to do mental math without an abacus, and even working memory in general. A calculator does the opposite. When I was younger I learned the abacus enough in Asian math school that I was able to do abacus calculations using muscle memory, so essentially an invisible abacus, which allowed me to do double-digit multiplication in my head pretty easily. So, pretty helpful if you can do that, lol. I think this is pretty useful. It illustrates mathematical concepts that otherwise might be taught as memory work. The more methods we can teach kids math skills, the more likely that one of them will click. My parents still do the invisible abacus thing with their fingers when doing math in their head. The tongue/taste map. Not only useless, but incorrect. My son came home a couple of weeks ago talking about the different tastes on the tongue. I live in Florida though, so the fact that they believe in taste at all is probably a good sign. This is going to sound stupid, but history the way it's taught is basically meaningless. A long category of dates and events without context or real discussion. The vast majority of history is trivia, because the real story is the cyclical nature of events. The rise and fall of empires, the periods of enlightenment and advance, and the reactionary times that bookend them. You learn that there used to be this thing called yellow journalism, but you don't learn that what kicked it off was the sudden availability and popularity of newspapers. And nobody draws the extremely obvious parallel to our modern blog-driven media. If I told you that in the mid to late 1800s, when newsprint was blowing up, that it was extremely common for papers to blatantly copy each other's stories with added editorial bias tailored to their viewers, sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Drawing parallels between the robber barons of the late 1800s and the current ones. Drawing parallels between the labor movements of that era and the ones that are growing again today. Shit's relevant and important to realize in context. But no, just memorize some fucking dates and names, so you'll have some shit to spout at trivia night later. Yeah. The funny thing is I hated history when I was in school, and love it now that I'm not. Turns out teaching history as rote memorization of dates is a bullshit way to teach it. I don't know how I'd do it better, but fuck. The way schools teach history is just bad. Edit. Like even just some pretext to the subjects would be nice. Like, hey, did you ever wonder why Mexico isn't a part of the United States? Instead, at least in my school, it was okay. Now turn to page 388, and we are gonna read about the War of 1812 or some shit. IDK. Write 20 pages about it. Former history teacher here. I graduated college in 2002, and I can assure you that the history teachers of today are very much taught to teach history by making connections in the way you are describing and eschewing memorization outside of a small amount of very key dates. That is, start of WWII in US history, 9 to 11, etc. If your history teacher is requiring you to know more than \10 specific dates, they are doing it oddly, or your state has a very backward history curriculum. That said, Asking people to understand sequence and cause/effect are different and extremely important. Your example about yellow journalism and the spread of newspapers in the US due to increased literacy rates is a good one. I hated history all throughout my schooling because all we were taught was trivia to memorize, dates of wars, dates of battles, names of generals, dates of elections, names of pilgrim boats, names and dates of colony formation, dates of state formation. I was terrible at memorization. I hated every second of it. Until high school, I had one teacher who narrativized history. He taught the big picture, the context, the causes, the material conditions pushing sides to conflict. I was captivated. He made the key players into characters whose fates I was invested in. I had no idea history could be interesting. Next year. New teacher. Back to memorizing dates and names. My nascent interest in history was smothered. It wouldn't come back until years after college, when I read my first biography. History came back to life to me. Now I have bookshelves of history books. In another world, I might have been a history major. It sucks that such a fascinating and valuable subject is made so soul-sucking. Shitty history teachers don't mean that history class is useless. My history teachers didn't like date memorization either, so they taught it with context instead. That hiding under your desk will keep you safe from bombs and tornadoes. That wasn't the lesson you could have learned. The real lesson was that people tend to panic, and panicking causes unpredictable and dangerous behavior. When you drill an action that makes a population feel like they have self-control over a situation, they will tend to follow that. Same as with patients and a disease. So often there is conflict between clinician and patient. Because the clinician will see it as the patient not being able to do anything, medically proven, at least, whereas the patient is looking for some agency, some self-control over a situation. Even if that is drinking carrot juice, or whatever. This helps explain the multitude of holistic medicines, and why they are popular, because there is always something you can do, or feel like there is, to have agency in a difficult situation. As others have said, the lesson wasn't always literally the subject matter / what was being taught. The idea is that, if the bomb goes off nearby enough, that you aren't immediately exploded, but the building collapses, the desk can protect you from falling debris. It might, if you are far enough away from the center of the storm or bomb, that you have to ignore bullies and or forgive them. In real outside world, if you bully someone you will 1. Get slapped across the face. 2. Get kicked in your butt. 3. Fired from work. Or 4. Shunned and made fun of. P.S. My friend's nephew got bullied at school. The bully was poking him with his finger so hard that the next day the nephew had like 20 small bruises all over his back. The teacher just told him to ignore him and made the bully apologize. Now I dare you to go to work tomorrow and start poking people and I see how far you go. If someone beats you up in high school it's bullying, and boys will be boys the moment you turn 18 suddenly it's called assault and they can go to jail for that. I had the pleasure of yelling that at my principal in 10th grade. Basically calling her out that as a teenager they wouldn't do anything about it, but the moment my bully turned 18 I could have his ass arrested. Suddenly she took the bullying situation differently now that I threatened to bring the cops in. On the flip side, the whole ignore bullies crap spawns a generation of people who are pushovers and have no idea how to set boundaries. Especially when their bully is a boss or some other authority figure, or even a relationship with an abusive partner. The only thing that worked to get bullies to stop picking on me was giving them a bloody nose or a black eye. That classical literature is the end all be all of reading. I get some books have cultural significance, but that doesn't warrant a 6-week in-depth analysis of a book kids can't relate to, with most being about challenges they will never face, culminating in an essay that's basically I understood it repeated over and over backed up by quotes. If you want your kids to never touch a book in their lives ever again, that is how you do it. I remember having to read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and Much Ado About Nothing and then having to endure weeks of mental masturbation about all the themes and narratives. Felt like a complete waste of time and put me off reading for a long time. This actually happened to me. It's only been in my late 20s that I've rediscovered my love for reading because I can read what I'm actually interested in, which can include some classics but it's really liberating to dump a book that's not grabbing you. I had to discover that it's okay to put a book down that you're not enjoying rather than endure. 2. It's liberating being able to do that now. I had a class at a school I never taught at before. I was a cover teacher and was tasked with getting the kids to study a poem from 200 years ago, forgot which one. They all groaned, saying they'd been studying it for 5 weeks now. And they hate poetry. The work they had to do was something they did 2 weeks prior. The absent teacher must have been lazy lol. They all said they'd already studied that part and did the exact same worksheet I was handing out. I know kids lie, but they legit knew all the answers etc. I instead spent the lesson getting them to read and discuss John Cooper Clarke. Guess what? They said they enjoyed it. Obviously it wasn't a poem like what? The curriculum can be so outdated, and you're spot on. There's nothing wrong with learning the classics, but it definitely needs modern and more relatable content. Another school I went to had the class of 14-year-olds reading and studying a Hunger Games novel, which was nice to see. Taught college students an intro to lit course over the summer and specifically tried to not teach those kinds of texts. Unfortunately, people have had majorly bad experiences with classic literature and hate reading. As a result, I can say with decent confidence that I don't think anything I learned was really useless. There's stuff I haven't used, but I don't regret learning it. You know, I like your take. Learning stuff is cool. There's a lot you learn in school, where the goal is to teach method or context or so on. Not necessarily to have you learn the specific content. Or I guess I should say the method is more important than the content. You don't learn to paint a sunset because sunsets specifically are important. You learn to paint a sunset so you can practice mixing colors, gradients, different brush strokes, etc. Cursive. I have never used it outside of signing my name. It's being phased out sorta. It's taught to kids young, but I think it's mostly about teaching kids to learn. I love writing in cursive, and I'm very grateful that I learned it in school, because I can write faster, and it looks better than when I write in detached letters. But I understand why it's not really that useful anymore. In the UK, when I was in school, if you did not write in cursive you were docked points on your exams. However, if your cursive was damned near unreadable, because you're like me, and your thoughts are faster than your hand can write them down, you'd be docked points for essentially having messy handwriting. Never had to learn typing in school thankfully. Just taught myself, and took to that like a charm. Now my hands can keep up with my thoughts when writing. They don't do it anymore. But back around 2000 in health class we all had to plan a wedding. Like, pair up and budget out a rental space, food, rings, etc. Looking back, what the fuck? I mean, the budgeting part would have been nice to have had, but it would have been better to have it be general budgeting. Not wedding budgeting per se, though I suppose it would have been fun, when I did get married, to see how close I could stay to the budget I had made then. I think it's a good exercise though. Teach kids young that weddings can get very expensive very quickly and maybe they'll dream a little smaller or decide to get married a little later. Edit. Not that getting married young or with a big wedding is bad, but I think a lot of kids set themselves up for failure by wanting a fairytale wedding right out of high school / college, and this might be a soft eye opener. Square dancing. I have no idea why the hell they thought it was necessary to teach a bunch of middle school kids square dancing in California. Not some backwoods school, but I have never seen anything related to square dancing since then. And this wasn't even a one-time class or something the teachers carried on for months teaching it. And then I never heard about it again. It's because Henry Ford pushed it as a national standard in schools, because he did not at all like the increasing popularity of jazz because jazz was a tool of the Jew. You'd think it'd be because of racism, right? Well, it was. But black people music was the Jews' fault. Ford wrote about it in the International Jew. Anywho, Ford spent a bunch of money convincing school districts to add square dancing to the curriculum, which would hopefully get kids to appreciate good wholesome white dancing. Historically it had something to do with Henry Ford's influence and his beliefs that it was an alternative to jazz, which he thought was socially destructive. Nowadays, Pet teachers will probably say it's because it's very easy to teach large groups of kids, and it forces adolescents to get over shyness about interacting with and holding hands with the opposite gender. Religion. 91 years of listening to the same old shit. At least in high school, it was little different. We got to watch Bruce Almighty. OE and RE teacher may have been a pedophile. Not useless, just poorly taught. History, it was just a collection of dates, names, and numbers. Memorize this stuff. We'll have a test. The significance of so many historical events was never taught or discussed. WW2 was the only one that was somewhat approached at scale. But even then it boiled down to Germany was pissed off about WW1 and Hitler hated the Jews. This was at a good high school too. The whole class was in advanced classes, IB/app. I don't think anything is truly useless. Each subject/topic exposes you to a different sphere. You may like some and dislike others, but without being introduced to them you wouldn't even know about its existence. College is the time you can focus on whatever specific sphere you like/want. Yeah, right. Truly useless? No. A waste of time better spent on something more useful is a better description. Plenty of things in that category in the US. Probably the Pledge of Allegiance. We did that every day from 1st grade through 12th grade. Let's say it took a minute per day. That's 5 minutes a week. Every 12 weeks. That's an hour. You're in school roughly 36 weeks a year. So that's 3 hours a year. Multiplied by 12 years and that's about 36 hours of your youth academic career spent talking to a flag. We had some punk kid when I was in 7th grade actually get suspended. Then take it to court and he won. So by high school, we could sit through the Pledge of Allegiance. Pretty sure you could have done it anyway. But this made the district finally stop giving a shit. That is, of course, unless you had this one substitute teacher who would literally demand every student recite the pledge in her classrooms, lest they be yelled at, threatened, and called a communist/fascist who spat on her dead sons. He was a Marine. Grave. History. Schools purposely ignore explaining the importance of history to a spiteful degree, and from there it's by far the most politicized subject. So much is glazed over to give the prettiest image of any country you're learning history in, such as King George III got a much different story told in US history textbooks vs the story my wife and I got of him from museums when we had our honeymoon in the UK. Other information is just wrong with a bizarre refusal to correct it. The most famous being Christopher Columbus, who was not the first European to reach North America. Nor was North America discovered by anyone from Europe. It was learned about by the European powers. Honorable mention goes to English class. For similar reasons, I only had one English class that actually put an emphasis on improving one's language skills, and it was an elective, creative writing. Every other class in high school and college was a weird compulsory book club. The problem with history is there's no time in primary or secondary schools to get in depth with anything or add much context. You have to go over everything at such a high level that there's no way to really relate the past to the present. Hence, we now have large numbers of incredibly ignorant people who can't see when history starts repeating. I was coming in here ready to defend education and say that even information you don't use in your everyday life has value. Then I read the first comment and realized I had rose-colored glasses on pretty fast. Growing up I was told not to use calculators to do math because when I get older and get to the outside world I won't have access to one. Once smartphones became commonplace, now I don't know anyone that don't use the calculator app. Monthly foreskin trimmings. I only need to trim maybe once or twice a year at the most. Monthly was just excessive. The only thing I learned from that class was a bunch of health procedures for cauterizing wounds safely and how to properly apply a tourniquet to the penis so it stops blood flow but doesn't do nerve damage. What fresh circle of hell were you educated in where this was part of the curriculum?